In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, July 18th, South Korea reports more than 26,000 new COVID-19 infections today, even amid the fewer testings over the weekend. Accordingly, authorities are calling on all those eligible to seek a second booster. Foreign Minister Park Jin and his Japanese counterpart Yoshimasa Hayashi are poised to sit down in Japan for talks which mark the first such bilateral diplomatic interaction in nearly 5 years. And the ruling People Power Party has asked the government to align its taxation scheme with that of OECD nations in reflection of the tough times. Related measures will be shared on Thursday. Starting today, all those in their 50s and above, as well as those 18 and older with underlying health conditions, can make reservations for their second COVID-19 booster shots. And while reservations begin on this Monday, the shots themselves will be administered from the 1st of August. Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
From Monday, more people can get their second COVID-19 booster shot. Previously, only people aged 60 and above and those with weak immune systems were eligible. But now, people aged 50 or older, adults with pre-existing health conditions, and those living in facilities for the disabled and the homeless can get the second booster. Health officials have recommended that people get the jab at least 4 months or 120 days after their previous dose. There are a few exceptions, though. People who need to urgently go abroad can receive a second booster if 3 months or 90 days have elapsed since they had their previous shot. Reservations for the new round of vaccinations open on Monday, with shots being administered from August 1st. However, those able to book leftover vaccine shots can get their booster earlier than this date depending on availability. South Korean authorities decided to expand the eligibility of second booster shots as COVID-19 figures creep up. On Monday, 26,299 new infections were reported. This was double the amount logged last week and also the highest figure for a Monday in 12 weeks. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho says a high inflation rate hovering on the 6% range could continue into September and October. However, he added that inflation is unlikely to sharply surpass the 6% mark for a significantly long period of time. Chu made the comments at the G20 meeting of finance ministers and central bank chiefs in Bali, Indonesia, where he also sat down with the head of the International Monetary Fund, who projected a grim outlook for the global economy. The IMF chief also hinted that the agency intends to further cut its growth forecast for major economies during its next review. The ruling People Power Party has asked the government to align its taxation scheme with that of the OECD nations in reflection of the tough times. In a meeting with Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on this Monday, the party called for efforts to ease income tax on the middle class, dining tax for corporate workers, and excessive housing taxes that were implemented under the previous administration. The party will also push for the lifting of corporate taxes to facilitate competition among businesses in the high-tech industry and lower ownership transfer taxes to ensure smooth operation of family businesses. The Finance Ministry, for its part, is poised to share its measures to these ends on Thursday. Government officials and members of the ruling party spent this past weekend, hammering out tangible measures to address public debt burden amid soaring inflation and efforts to tame it. Among the measures on the table are fixed mortgage rates and a currency swap with the US. Our Lee Kyung-won reports.
Amid rising inflation and interest rates, President Yoon Suk-yeol's ruling People Power Party and the government met on Sunday to cushion the impact on people. At top of their agenda is easing the burden on homeowners.
The government will enable homeowners to switch from a variable to a fixed-rate mortgage if their home is worth less than $300,000 starting September.
More details are to follow, but the party spokesperson said the current plan is to keep the interest rate at 4% rate instead of some 5 to 6% that's expected at the current pace. And the party and the government are also reviewing a currency swap with the U.S. to stabilize volatility in the market.
Last Friday, the Korean won fell to its lowest point against the dollar in 13 years and 2 months, prompting calls for a resumption of the currency swap with the US that's been on hold since the previous administration.
In regards to gas prices, the government will decide whether to cut fuel taxes further than the current 37% after monitoring global oil prices that have recently started to go down. Meanwhile, the government is going to swiftly permit the entry of some 50,000 foreign workers to ease manpower shortages in the agricultural and manufacturing sectors and ultimately help stabilize prices. On the COVID-19 front, the government reaffirmed it will be taking science-based measures to tackle the resurgence.
The government will do its best to protect people's lives based on data and expert advice.
And those measures will be largely focused on vaccination and treatment, not social distancing. The PM called for the swift administration of 4 shots, specifically for those over 50 years old or with chronic diseases. Meanwhile, the government will secure treatments for some 940,000 people by the first half of next year. Young-eun, Arirang News.
In other news, Foreign Minister Park Jin is heading to Japan on this Monday to meet with his counterpart Yoshimasa Hayashi. There is also speculation that Park's 3-day agenda may include a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida amid fresh efforts to revive diplomatic exchanges that have been stalled for nearly 5 years. The last diplomatic interaction took place in December 2017. Now, Seoul and Tokyo have yet to settle their differences over historical matters, including compensation for Koreans who were forced to labor during Japanese colonial rule. In Ukraine, military authorities there say Russia is poised to broaden and bolster its offensive against Ukrainian cities. Our Kim Hyo-san reports.
Russia is reportedly preparing for the next stage of its offensive in Ukraine. That's according to a spokesperson for Ukrainian military intelligence, who explained that Moscow said its forces would step up military operations in all operational areas. The officials said that they have been witnessing shelling along the entire front line, noting that there is an active use of tactical aviation and attack helicopters. In recent days, Russian rockets have pounded Ukrainian cities, leaving dozens dead. Fresh attacks have been reported across Ukraine lately, with at least 3 people killed in a Russian missile attack in the country's central city of Dnipro last Friday. During the past weeks, Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, was also hit by a barrage of missiles. The Ukrainian military also says that Moscow appears to be regrouping units for an offensive toward Sloviansk, an important city held by Ukraine in the eastern Donetsk region. The development comes as Western deliveries of long-range arms begin to help Ukraine on the battlefield. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
Europe is battling a brutal heat wave that is not only endangering lives but also the environment there with rampant wildfires. Our Kim Bo-kyung reports.
A life-threatening heat wave in Europe. Centered on countries in Europe's southwest, the heat has caused wildfires and deaths. For days now, Spain has seen temperatures as high as 45.7 degrees Celsius or 114 degrees Fahrenheit. In the past week, according to the Carlos III Health Institute, it's caused at least 360 heat-related deaths. The extreme heat is also bringing wildfires. A fire in Spain's Extremadura region, close to the Portuguese border, has burned around 3,000 hectares and forced people to evacuate.
Here we're fighting, and what else can we do? I'm quite devastated, to be honest.
It's a similar situation in France, where more than 1,000 firefighters have been battling wildfires in the Gironde region. More than 12,200 people have been forced to evacuate as of Saturday morning. The fires had reportedly burned nearly 10,000 hectares as of Saturday. But the heat wave in western France is forecast to reach its peak on Monday at above 40 degrees Celsius. Other countries are also bracing for extreme heat. The British government has issued a red heat warning for the first time as temperatures in the United Kingdom are expected to soar as high as 40 degrees Celsius on Monday and Tuesday. The highest temperature ever recorded in Britain was 38.7 degrees Celsius. That was in Cambridge on July 25, 2019.
Well, we're putting in extra measures in terms of call handlers, support for fleet, extra hours of capacity within the ambulances, and I was discussing with the ambulance chief execs the specific measures that they're taking.
Though extra measures are in the works, officials are expressing concern over the healthcare system already challenged by the COVID-19 pandemic. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Right, and that brings us to the end of part 1 of the Daily Report. In part 2, we address cross-border ties. Stay with us.
What matters?
Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we revisit cross-border ties amid efforts by the Yoon administration to ensure a stronger sense of regional security in light of the recent changes to global order. For more, I have Professor Chung Go-yeon from Gangwon National University. Professor Chung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me here.
I also have Dr. Bruce Burnett at RAND Corporation live on the line. Dr. Burnett, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Right, Professor Zhang, we'll start here. Now, following its largest single test of, I believe, 8 short-range ballistic missiles on the 5th of June, that was just a day after Seoul and Washington ended their joint military drills, North Korea so far appears to have been less belligerent in recent days. I mean, there was the artillery firing last Sunday. How do you explain this seemingly less aggressive stance adopted by North Korea in recent days?
Well, there are many signs actually about North Korea is preparing for the next nuclear test, like they're preparing the wire and the kind of tunnel kind of construction, so forth and so on. But I think North Korea's current behavior is based on their calculations that another test may be kind of make a problem on the relationship between China and North Korea, because additional tests will probably invite more strategic assets to the Korean Peninsula and East Asia from the United States, which will make more competition between U.S. and China more aggressive and more confrontational, which will kind of can be a burden when it comes to two countries' relationship where North Korea rely on their kind of economic assistance, and especially during the coronavirus pandemic period. So that consideration make North Korea more restrained in terms of their nuclear test, I think.
Right. And Dr. Burnett, do you suppose the heightened joint defense posture between Seoul and Washington, as well as perhaps the trilateral security pledge with neighboring Tokyo, is keeping Pyongyang in check? I mean, simply speaking, how do you explain the current status quo here on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, I think those are clearly factors. Those clearly make a difference to North Korea. Kim Jong-un does not want to cause a major problem with China, as Professor Chang has just said. He also is concerned that the U.S. could overreact to anything he does, to really step up actions against the North Korean economy, which the U.S. has been a little bit soft on. But also take other military actions that he doesn't want. The recent deployment of F-35 aircraft to the peninsula, it's got to be pretty shocking to Kim. He really doesn't like that kind of system being there.
Right. And Professor Chung, the Unification Ministry here in South Korea recently took issue with North Korea's unauthorized use of South Korean facilities and equipment at the joint industrial complex of Kaesong. Could you tell us a bit more about this issue?
Well, actually, yeah, last week, the Ministry of Unification made a comment about that issue. And I think that shows a Yoon administration's kind of posture toward North Korea. While the current North Korea policy is being drafted by the Ministry of Unification, but their principle is that they will take a more rule-based approach based on their reciprocity. So when you, in retrospect, in 2020, there was explosion in the North-South Korea liaison office, and current Moon administration didn't take any actions and didn't make a kind of criticism about it. But South Korea's Yoon administration taking a different approach and acquiesce or taking a more softer approach does not really change North Korea's behavior. That kind of mentality in the current Yoon administration's kind of idea.
Right. And staying with the Yoon administration, Professor Chung, what do you believe are the chances of perhaps another joint economic venture between South and North Korea? I mean, President Yoon Suk-yeol has spoken about an audacious economic plan for North Korea if it surrenders its nuclear ambitions.
Yeah, actually, President Yoon made about that plan. As I said, current North Korea policy is being drafted at this moment, but the idea is that if North Korea denuclearizes completely, South Korea will support their economic development. And even if North Korea take a more substantial step toward denuclearization, South Korea will support exemption on the UN sanctions against North Korea. That's the kind of basic idea. But the thing we have to concern is that such economy and security trade model has been applied many times in the past, and it doesn't really change North Korea's behavior in terms of developing nuclear weapons. So that should be taken into account and try to have more creative approach how to engage North Korea to table in the first place.
Right. Dr. Burnett, recent remarks by former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are making some local headlines here. Now, speaking of video addressing the Asian Leadership Conference, which was here in South Korea last week, Pompeo claimed that Beijing disrupted efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula because it benefits from Kim Jong-un's possession of nuclear weapons. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that's being overly critical of China. China, I think, is interested in taking care of their own interests. From their perspective, they have not recognized that the North Korean nuclear weapons are a threat to China. And so they're not prepared to take a strong action. Moreover, their perception appears to be that the pressure techniques with North Korea are actually wrong and should be backed off from in order to get North Korea to be more responsive to reductions. I think that's probably not right. I think the reality is that pressure on North Korea is an important component, but it's got to be a carrot and stick approach. The United States has got to be prepared to offer things to North Korea to get it to try to be cooperative. Will North Korea ever give up all its nuclear weapons? Probably not. Will it even stop its nuclear weapon production? Quite possibly not. But some reduction in all of that is important. We don't want a future with a huge number of North Korean nuclear weapons.
Right, we don't, of course. Now, beyond the Korean peninsula, North Korea and Ukraine are engaged in a confrontation of their own as Pyongyang officially acknowledges the independence of Moscow-supported separatist regions in eastern Ukraine. Let's now take a moment then to listen in on the comments by people there in Ukraine before we continue our discussion. Do take a listen.
We received a decision today about North Korea recognizing the Donetsk People's Republic. At this stage, we established diplomatic relations. Relevant authorities work in this direction.
Today, representatives of the occupied areas in Donetsk announced that, as they say, they were recognized by the DPRK. Of course, we will react very harshly at all levels.
Right, and right after those comments, Ukraine severed its diplomatic ties with North Korea, to which Pyongyang responded very defiantly, of course. Professor Zhang, how do you interpret North Korea's latest diplomatic move?
Actually, that was a very interesting move by North Korea. We didn't really expect it that North Korea will recognize those countries' independence. While when you look at China, China does not take that action because China needs to care about their own kind of dissidence and their independence and autonomy of those regions in Xinjiang. So they are kind of relatively reluctant to take that action. But North Korea seems to take up broader pictures that they are tactically aligned with Russia and China, as Yoon Suk-yeol administration is kind of strengthening trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. And actually, Prime Minister Park Jin is taking a kind of talk today in Japan as well. So in response to that strategic coalitions in Northeast Asia, North Korea is taking a more tactical move against this situation.
Right, and Dr. Bennett, staying with the same topic and keeping in mind the earlier remarks by Mr. Pompeo, do you suppose that there was some perhaps external prodding from Moscow or maybe Beijing on Pyongyang for this posture with regard to the crisis in Ukraine? And if so, for what purpose?
Oh, absolutely. I think we have to recognize what this is from North Korea. North Korea is in bad shape economically. They've got major problems where they cannot feed their people. They're not producing goods that their people want. This creates a tremendous degree of instability. I suspect that Russia, with a surplus of oil right now, has probably made commitments to provide more oil to North Korea, even though that's against UN sanctions. I suspect they've also committed to providing food and other goods and services in order to get North Korea to take this action. So this is almost certainly a case of the Russians and the Chinese providing incentives, mainly the Russians. The Chinese, though, certainly want to support the Russians against the rest of the world, which is a bothersome development.
Right. Professor Zhang, earlier there had been talk about an impending nuclear test, which is something you mentioned earlier, by North Korea. But such speculation in recent days, and do correct me if I'm wrong, appear to be less audible. What are your thoughts on the actual probability of a nuclear test in the very near future?
I think we can make two different arguments at this point, because given that 2.5 years of coronavirus pandemic in North Korea, there is a kind of a shortage of food and kind of lack of medical supplies. People are kind of suffering from that situation. So given that calculations, Kim Jong-un may not be, confidently test another nuclear test in the near future. But at the same time, when you look at strategic kind of calculations, there was a strategic concept announced by NATO, and actually South Korea President Yoon Suk-yeol actually participated at NATO summit as well, which actually attempted to check and balance against China. So given the situation, China may not kind of put restraint on North Korea's behavior in terms of nuclear tests. So we can make a both argument at this point, but at the same time, it depends on how North Korea actually feel pressured from China and current situation.
Right, it really does. Dr. Bennett, last week's joint drills by South Korea's Air Force and its U.S. counterpart involved F-35A fighter jets that you mentioned for the first time. Now, pundits say such blatant shows of military strength may serve to perhaps hinder efforts to engage North Korea. Do you agree?
I think that's a naive perspective, because the U.S. has F-16 aircraft in Korea right now. But the F-16s are being replaced by F-35s. So the deployment of U.S. F-35 aircraft to Korea wasn't just about some kind of exercise to intimidate North Korea. It was a test case. It was a case of trying to make sure that we could operate the aircraft in the Korean environment, manage maintenance, and do other things, and certainly work well with the South Korean F-35 aircraft. So this is a development which is coming. Kim may be very unhappy that that is a development which is coming, because the F-35 aircraft is a very capable aircraft and something that's going to bother the North Korean missile defense people, the North Korean defense people in general. But this is something which is coming. And so there's going to be increasing experimentation of U.S. F-35s with South Korean and other South Korean aircraft. It's part of the current efforts.
Right. And that being said, Professor Jung, the Yoon administration here, like you mentioned earlier, is seeking a fresh North Korea policy. Now, that being said, what do you believe needs to be taken into account to allow for perhaps a more productive policy?
Actually, this time is a pretty difficult time for Yoon administration, because currently Biden administration is pretty distracted because of the Ukraine crisis. So North Korea policy is kind of out of their priority at this moment, and their calibrated, practical kind of approach does not include the components of maximum pressure that has been, that might have been invite North Korea to the negotiation table during the Trump administration, but that does not exist at this moment. So South Korea need to be more proactive to the international community that North Korea issue is pretty serious, and we are feeling threatened by this North Korea's provocation at the same time. But as Dr. Bennett has mentioned, there should be a carrot and stick as well. And carrot, as I mentioned earlier, they are not responding to specific carrot we suggested throughout our entire history. So we need to be more creative. But at the same time, we need to make their nuclear development as well as missile technology more costly. In other words, cooperating with the United States in terms of strategic asset, a joint exercise, and developing more missile defense system, that will make costly for North Korea to develop more their technology and venture their provocation. So that should be the kind of part of new North Korea policy of Yoon administration, I guess.
Right, I see. And Dr. Bennett, I understand that it may be too early to evaluate the Yoon administration at this particular point, but out of a score of 10, what would you grant the Yoon administration with regard to its current efforts on North Korea-related matters?
Well, I think you have to remember that at the beginning of the Biden administration, one of the first things they set up was a North Korea policy committee. And it took them over 3 months to reach a conclusion about what the policy should be. I think you've got the same sort of thing going on in the Yoon administration right now. The new personnel are attempting to develop a policy. In the meantime, they're trying to do a little bit of treading water in order to be able to prevent a major crisis from developing, but they haven't really got their full policy yet. So in terms of an interim policy, I think you can score them maybe a 7 or so. But what will be really interesting is what their final policy is that they come up with, which hopefully will occur soon, that they will have their strategy identified. And I say that this should be a carrot and stick approach. There have to be new things offered to North Korea that will catch North Korea's attention. Things to help perhaps with COVID, things to help with their economy, things to help internationally, and not necessarily tied to major reductions in nuclear programs. That's premature. It's got to be a more incremental program. This one step solves everything isn't going to work.
Right, or perhaps a more innovative approach, as Professor Chung has been saying today. All right, Dr. Burnett, as always, thank you very much for your time and for joining us live at this very late hour at your end. And Professor Chung here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here in capital Seoul, it was a rather eventful weekend with a pride parade this past Saturday and a related protest, both attracting thousands of people. My colleague Kim Hyun-sung was there.
Rainbow-colored flags in the heart of Seoul. Seoul Queer Culture Festival has come back in full after being disrupted by the pandemic over the past 2 years. In central Seoul's Junggu district on Saturday, people marched with pride.
And as if to make up for lost time, a huge crowd has flocked to Seoul Plaza in support of LGBTQ rights. But right outside the fence that's surrounding Plaza, some Christian and conservative groups are staging protests, and the demonstrators are so loud that their sound is overpowering the sounds within the festival.
Actually, my parents go to church, and their church is also protesting outside, so it's just a shame.
Police lines were deployed in case tensions escalated and to keep people safe. But despite protests, the Pride movement has grown year after year. Around 135,000 people attended this year's festival.
Around 20 years ago, when we first did the parade, around 200 to 300 people took part in the parade. So we've grown a lot in 20 years.
As more people came out with their sexualities, support also grew. Allies, Buddhist monks, and family members began to take part in the event as well.
So I wanted to express my solidarity with the people of this community here in Korea and show that there's an opportunity to make change.
We're giving out these 5 coloured bracelets because, like these colours that become more beautiful when mixed together, our society will become happier and healthier if we embrace people with different sexual identities and preferences.
My kid is transgender, but when I look at our society, so many people just hate and oppress sexual minorities when they don't know anything about them. I came here because I wanted to help.
The day of the parade was hot, humid, and rainy. But that didn't stop the long tail of people marching with pride. The festival will go on until the end of this month, with Queer Film Festival hosting movie screenings this Friday to Sunday. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
In other news, a U.S. research team has developed a rather appealing and affordable technology that allows the use of drones even during adverse weather. Cho Sung-min has more.
A new drone demonstration test took place in South Korea last year to test whether drones could deliver pizza. A drone traveled 2.6 kilometers and was able to carry several boxes of pizza and bottles of soda. Since last year's test, drones are currently being used in an array of fields, from helping rear crops on rural farms to assessing the safety of public facilities. But the gadgets have one big Achilles heel: they can't operate in adverse weather. To solve this problem and put the drones to better use, A research team at the California Institute of Technology has developed an enhanced drone that can not only fly in intense winds, but can also spontaneously adapt to even harsher weather conditions. Using artificial intelligence, the drones detect how the wind changes and then find a safe course to reach its destination. The team's already succeeded in testing its drone in a 12-minute flight in fierce winds similar to a tornado or hurricane. The test also revealed that the drones showed only 25% of errors in reaching the correct destination compared to normal drones. Another benefit is that the drone is very easy to build and quite affordable.
I think this drone is actually very standard and very easy to manufacture. For example, this computer is called Raspberry Pi. It's super cheap. It's like $50, and it's very easily accessible. And this motors is also very, easily accessible.
Also, because the drone isn't built from scratch, but rather an upgraded version of a regular drone, engineers say the system can be easily commercialized and applied to other robots and airplanes.
That can make the air ride more smoother and more comfortable and so on, because it can actually handle these turbulent wind conditions better.
Included in the international journal Science Robotics, the development will spearhead a new technological phase that'll make drones more convenient and readily available. 조성민, Arirang News.
Prevention, as most know, is better than cure, and that is precisely what South Korea is seeking with its first tsunami floodgate, given the country's proximity to quake-prone Japan. Yoon-jin explains.
Standing at the entrance of Samcheok Port in Gangwon Province is South Korea's first tsunami prevention safety tower. It took 7 years to complete and cost roughly $38.6 million. The structure has two 15-story towers, and when put into operation, a huge floodgate slowly descends between the towers. When a tsunami warning is issued, this iron floodgate that's 50 meters long and 7 meters high blocks the entrance to the port. Additionally, a 900-meter-long barrier gate around the floodgate closes to protect the fishing boats at the port, as well as the coastal village. The floodgate is designed to prevent flooding from tsunami waves up to 3.7 meters high.
We are expecting this to help protect lives, property and livelihoods by minimizing damage to fishing boats, coastal restaurants and houses around the port.
If a magnitude 7 earthquake hits the west coast of Japan, this could cause a tsunami to cross the East Sea and hit Korea 90 minutes later.
The East Sea is at high risk of earthquake tsunamis because its depth is over 1,000 meters, and there is a high chance of being hit with a magnitude 7 earthquake.
In the area of Samcheok, where the floodgate has been set up, there have been major tsunamis in 1983 and 1993, which caused 5 deaths and over $540,000 in property damage. This flood prevention tower has also become a landmark. The top floor has an observatory open to the public free of charge, where it also hopes to provide earthquake and tsunami-related education programs. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
In our feature segment this week, we delve into the issue of abortion here in South Korea, especially amid the U.S. Supreme Court's recent ruling to end the constitutional right to abortion. My colleague Shin Yoon has this extended report covering South Korea's stance on the matter.
Instead of a hospital, this is where some pregnant women leave their just-born infants. Recently, a woman in her 20s was sentenced to 3 years in prison for killing her newborn baby and throwing it away in a clothing collection box.
Over the past 5 years, the National Police Agency has found over 600 abandoned infants. Of those, roughly 50 were killed. When these parents were asked why they thought they had no other choice, some said they weren't financially ready to raise a child. Some others said they thought abortion was illegal. But is this true? Is abortion illegal in South Korea? This is a tricky question. In 2019, the Constitutional Court of Korea decided to decriminalize abortion. They overturned 2 articles that had stood for 66 years. Under these articles, women were sentenced to up to 1 year in prison or given a $1,500 fine. The doctors can be sentenced to 2 years in prison. Though the Criminal Act has disappeared, a critical law related to abortion has remained. That's the Mother and Child Health Act, which states that abortion should only be done before the woman reaches week 24 of her pregnancy. And there are certain conditions that need to be met. For instance, the law only allows abortion when the woman or her spouse suffers from any genetic or mental handicap, or when the pregnancy was the result of rape or incest. Also, if the pregnancy itself is likely to have a negative impact on the person's health.
Realizing that restrictions on abortions with no penalties can cause confusion, the Constitutional Court asked lawmakers to make amendments by December 31st, 2020. But reaching consensus on such a divisive subject is no easy task. Some lawmakers are pushing for stricter abortion laws, like Seo Jung-suk, who proposed an amendment to the Mother and Child Health Act so that only women who are up to 10 weeks pregnant can get an abortion. This side argues that human life starts as early as the fetus stage, and that by 10 weeks, the fetus already has bones and organs. Other lawmakers, like Kwon In-suk, believe abortion is an issue that should be decided by the pregnant woman, not the government.
Deciding up to which week you can get an abortion is insensible when the act has been decriminalized. Instead, we should be discussing how to make sure abortion operations are done safely. For instance, if we can include abortion into our national health insurance.
For over 3 years, the National Assembly has failed to come to an agreement. Human rights activists have also voiced a need for change.
It should be solely up to the woman to decide how they live their lives and what happens to their bodies. Asking a woman to unwillingly be pregnant for 10 months and give birth just because she missed what the law considers the appropriate time to get an abortion is unjust. Then who's going to take care of the child once it's born?
Pro-life activists agreed that nurturing a child from an unwanted pregnancy is difficult, but they said abortion may not be the only answer women seek.
Why do women have to be the only ones who have to go through surgery? Why should they have to risk even the smallest chance of side effects or mental trauma when they weren't the only ones involved in making a baby? Instead of just allowing abortion to everyone, shouldn't the government be strengthening child protection acts and welfare policies?
The WHO has found that over 25 million unsafe abortions happen globally each year. Doctors said this may be from limited information on abortions.
Because there aren't specific guidelines, everyone practices abortion differently, which definitely causes confusion. Some doctors don't carry out abortions at all due to religious reasons. Some, like myself, only perform it on women who are up to 22 weeks pregnant because from this point on, the fetus can live outside the woman's womb.
Unlike other medical procedures, there aren't lists showing which hospitals provide abortions and their general price. Even when I called a few gynecologists in Seoul, they all had different answers.
혹시 해당 산부인과에서 인공 임신 중절 수술 진행하시는지 여쭤보고 싶어서요.
아니요, 진행하지 않고 있어요. 그건 알려드리기가 어려울 것 같아요. 보호자분이 반대하시는 부분만 없으시면은 이제 산모분 동의하에 수술이 가능하시고요. 저희 병원은 그 임신 초기 3개월까지만 진행이 되세요.
3개월 최대면은 얼마인 건지.
보통 100만 원 정도 내외라고 보시면 되세요.
그 모든 병원이 그런 거죠?
병원마다 비용은 차이가 있을 수 있어요.
With information regarding abortion being so limited, a lot of women believe they have no choice but to take matters in their own hands. Most of the times, this includes looking for mifegyne, an abortion drug on the black market. Though legal in over 70 countries for months now, mifegyne still hasn't officially been given the green light from Korea's Ministry of Food and Drug Safety. Officials say they're still testing its safety. That's why there isn't any medical counseling for people looking for this drug. While it's only safe to take up to 10 weeks into a pregnancy, many Koreans looking for this abortion drug aren't aware of this and face unwanted side effects. This is what upsets doctors like Yoon Jung-won the most, especially because they realize abortion is one of the easiest and safest surgical procedures out there, as long as it's done under protocol.
There's a much lower risk for complications or death when you have an abortion compared to taking out your tonsils or getting a colonoscopy. But this is only if, of course, as long as doctors follow protocol and patients go to qualified professionals.
Regardless of their opinion about abortion itself, everyone I talked to all agreed that there's more the government could do to prevent unsafe abortions.
Our organization isn't just advocating the rights of a fetus. We're also fighting for the rights and protection of women. Women shouldn't feel as if their only choice is to harm their own bodies and get surgery. Instead, there should be changes to the country's sex education and policies that help women who feel as if they can't raise their own child.
It shouldn't just be up to women to carry this burden. Whatever reason that might be, the government should be making sure that this individual can make a safe choice. In order to do that, we need much more access to information.
The government needs to provide laws that can protect our rights and overall our lives. With laws and regulations, misleading information and unsafe abortions can be filtered out.
This is what governments around the world are trying to do. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the 1973 Roe v. Wade ruling, which had made abortion a constitutional right. President Joe Biden is trying to reverse this ruling, while some states are trying to bring back strict regulations. Other countries like New Zealand decriminalized abortion in 2020. That's why they no longer require women who are up to 20 weeks into their pregnancy to have a doctor's referral. But this hasn't been an easy task.
Still, there are people who are concerned. And the process of putting that legislation together involved a lot of consultation on some of these very vexed issues about what is the right time limit. Is 20 weeks the right time? Should it be longer or shorter? What conditions should be applied and so on? So these are complex, tricky issues. But fundamentally, the point of this legislation is to remove abortion from the crimes list, make it a health issue, and ensure that women have greater, easier access both to make the decision and then to abortion services.
Just like the rest of the world, South Korea is still trying to look for a solution for this complex issue. But amid the current legal limbo, women still can't say for sure where they stand or what their options are. Shin Yeun, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Greece, a plane carrying weapons has crashed. Carrying 11 metric tons of munitions from Serbia to Bangladesh, a Ukrainian cargo plane has crashed in northern Greece, killing all 8 crew members on board. Greek and Serbian authorities said on Sunday that an Antonov An-12 aircraft crashed on Saturday while on its way to a stopover in Jordan. The pilot had requested an emergency landing shortly after takeoff due to engine trouble, but ultimately crashed near the city of Kavala. Meanwhile, Ukraine's foreign ministry has confirmed all 8 victims were Ukrainian citizens. So far, 1 body has been recovered. Owing to the explosive cargo, which includes landmines, authorities have been using drones to survey the crash site. In the UK, the race for Britain's next Prime Minister is heating up. 5 candidates remain and they laid out their plans in an hour-long television debate on Sunday, clashing over tax cuts, Brexit, trans rights and public trust. All 5 said they would not call an early election if chosen by the Conservative Party for the PM position. The fiercest clashes were between former Chancellor Rishi Sunak and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss. They came to a head over ways to rein in rising living costs while growing the economy. Conservative MPs will hold a 3rd vote on Monday to cut the contenders down to 2 final candidates. Competing for the title of Fischerkönig or Fisher King, competitors in Germany tried to knock each other into a lake in a traditional water jousting competition. At Lake Starnberg in Bavaria on Saturday and Sunday, 63 young men and women from the area took part in the 500-year-old Fischerstechen event that saw a crowd of some 2,000 people. They dressed up, sat on wooden planks attached to boats, and used long lances to force each other into the water. The event takes place every 5 years, and the winner is the last person standing. 17 years after calling off their first engagement, actor Ben Affleck and singer Jennifer Lopez appear to have finally tied the knot. Media reports on Sunday say the couple got married in Las Vegas after restarting their relationship nearly 2 decades after they separated. And according to documents found online, the actor and singer obtained a marriage license from Clark County, Nevada on Saturday. The couple, also known as Bennifer, rekindled their romance last year and were engaged in April. So far, representatives for both Affleck and Lopez have been unreachable for comment. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Monday afternoon. Those of you in southern regions have to be prepared for torrential heavy downpours with heavy rain alerts, which have slightly improved by now. Low-lying areas are the most vulnerable, so be extra careful of flooding and ensure there is adequate drainage for water. The southeast coast will be battered by heavy rain, up to 150 millimeters until tomorrow. And other regions will see 5 to 80 millimeters. And another issue for today is strong wind. When combined with heavy rain, it can be very damaging. So make sure your outdoor furniture is firmly secured. Now that central and northern parts of the country are less affected by rain clouds, the scorching hot weather continues. Please wear loose-fitting and lightweight clothes to keep yourself cool. But meanwhile, southern regions are relatively cooler, mostly below 30 degrees. And as the rain fizzles out tomorrow morning, temperatures will soar again, and the monsoon will return from the later part of this week in southern regions. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And those are the stories at this hour. Stay tuned to Arirang News for more on the day's headlines. Thank you for now.